Hello, everyone. New video today from Science Insider. Neurologists debunk 11 brain myths. All right. So we can see, we started with the first one. We only use 10% of our brains. I always knew that was a myth. I remember had like a small argument with my ex-girlfriend at the time. She was like, she was going to medical school. So she was just like, oh, did you know we only use 10% of our brains? And I was just like, that doesn't make any sense. If we only use 10% of our brains, it would atrophy like a muscle. Everybody, we brain dead all the time. And she got all pissed off, and then she looked it up, and yeah, she was wrong, but she was too prideful to say it. Anyways, let's see how this goes.
We only use 10% of our brains.
So this is not true.
The bigger the brain, the smarter the creature. Size doesn't
Elephants aren't that smart, right?
matter.
You can't prevent a stroke.
So,
No.
that's not true.
That's very not true,
very not
actually.
true.
Hi, I'm Dr. Santoshi Bilakota. I'm a
Santosha? Oh, Santoshi. Lakota. What? Is she Indian? What it was gonna clinical assistant professor of neurology. That's just too many. God damn. Clinical assistant professor of neurology. Just why? Oh my God.
clinical assistant professor in neurology at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine.
I'm Dr. Brad Kamitaki. I'm a neurologist.
Brad Kamitaki. He has less of an accent than she does. Assistant professor of neurology also. He's not clinical though. You ain't practicing, son.
And assistant professor at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School.
And today we'll be debunking myths about
She doesn't drink enough water.
the human brain.
The bigger the brain, the smarter the creature.
Size actually does not matter when it comes to the brain because there are creatures out there with bigger brains than us, but probably not as complex. Your brain is really determined by your body proportion, right? So when you think of like a big brown bear that's way bigger than us, their brain is going to be bigger, but that doesn't necessarily
Yeah, it's bigger than us, but because of their body size, it's not big compared to their body.
mean that they are smarter than us. We don't
That's why our heads are gigantic, especially babies, little bobbleheads.
know that for sure because it hasn't been fully studied, but we've seen that in instances such as chimpanzees. They do have smaller brains, but we do know for a fact that chimpanzees are probably as smart as we are.
Certainly,
No, no. If they were, we would know by now. And like they would be doing stuff that we have done. At least they would at least be in the goddamn like Iron Age or something. They would be somewhere behind us where we can be like, they have potential, but they didn't quite get there.
it's not the size of the brain that matters, but probably how complex it is and how well developed certain areas are. Certain areas in humans are, for example, our language centers are just much more developed than a cow or
Even a
bear, things
chimpanzee,
like that.
yeah.
That's important in determining intelligence rather than the size itself.
And also, how do we measure intelligence? That also becomes tricky
Did she come to work drunk? What is going on with this lady?
because not everyone is intelligent in the same way. Non-cognitive factors also play a role, like what's your social intelligence, what's your emotional intelligence. All of that, I think, is very complex and really difficult to measure. IQ tests are all
Social intelligence? See, that's when it gets asinine because that doesn't make any sense. That's like saying street smarts and all this other things. Just because you're familiar with a subject, you're practicing it, doesn't mean that you're more intelligent about it. You're just more knowledgeable and experienced. That shouldn't be how you measure intelligence, right? A monkey could be an expert at freaking like driving a car or whatever. You spend years training a monkey to drive a car. Just because a freaking human teenager doesn't know how to drive a car doesn't mean the monkey has better car intelligence. Like, it's just stupid.
always an accurate measure.
You test always an accurate measure of intelligence. No, it's an accurate test of knowledge.
of intelligence.
So this is false. There's so much that goes into intelligence. Normal intelligence tests might measure things like executive function or planning, verbal skills, reading skills, things like that, but it's only an approximation of what you can do and highly influenced by the conditions of the test, how you're feeling at the time of the test, your educational level. It would be nice to say that there's one test or one way that we can determine how intelligent someone is, but there's so much that goes into intelligence that
You don't have to keep looking over at her. This dude just screams, "I need approval." Like it's just oozing off of her. She's too drunk to even.
one test or even multiple different tests can't measure that very well.
So the popular IQ test was developed in the early 1900s, and it was a way to determine which French students were cognitively delayed so we could offer them better resources. That got adopted in America at Stanford, but for all the reasons Brad laid out, it doesn't take all of those things into account. So I think although it is nice to say, hey, I am smart, I did well on an IQ test, really don't think that means too much.
Neither of us were born being doctors, right? We had to learn and develop those skills under many years of training. I think that education is the best way to kind of make that happen. Education very broadly, that might not necessarily be school for everyone.
Definitely, some people are savants, some people are prodigies. It's really hard to say what determines that.
They might be better at certain things, but not necessarily good at others. We're all in.
That's a sad bit of facial hair he's got going on. Japanese genetics did not do him any favors.
Individuals, we all have different talents and different aptitudes for different things. So IQ tests just kind of measure your intelligence in that one specific area, not how overall intelligent you are. We only use 10% of our brains.
So this is not true. We actually use all of our brain, not.
She's definitely a wine mom. Like you just see, I think she's having an allergic reaction to her, because her mouth barely moves when she talks.
All of the time, but most of the time we're using some percentage of our brain. This myth came into fruition, I think in the early 1800s, where people were trying to figure out why injuring different parts of the brain caused disabilities in people. So a bunch of psychologists came up with the theory that we only use about 10% of our brains versus people who are smarter who use more. Now we simply...
It could just be those 10%, they just didn't know what it does. And they're like, oh, well, we're not using it. I mean, the 90%, they're like, that 90%, they don't know what it does. So they're like, I guess we're not using it.
You know that is not the case. We know that because we have something called a PET MRI and a functional MRI study.
We have the frontal lobe, which we use for a lot of different purposes: motor function, language function, executive functioning, or planning activities. Behind that, our parietal lobe here, which is our sensory.
It's crazy how our bodies are just sort of like split in half, and that shape is just like reoccurring. Like you got your chest, your heart kind of does a little split like that. Your ass cheeks kind of come like that as well. Like just a lot of the body just regurgitates this shape.
Cortex. In the back of the brain, we have the occipital lobe, which is our visual processing center. And then here on the side, we have the temporal lobe, which is involved in memory, language comprehension on the left side.
So to give you an
and even here, look at that, scrotum, penis. Just a lot of shapes just kind of just recycled all over the body.
example, if you are reading something, you're going to be using your temporal lobes for comprehension. You're going to be using your frontal lobes for comprehension. You'll also be using the back.
I don't really care. I use it automatically. I don't need to keep track. I don't need to be like, okay, let me engage my frontal lobe now.
Of your head where your visual cortex sits, because that's where information from your eyeballs travel and your body kind of makes sense of it that way.
And then also, if we take the brain apart a little bit, we have our brain stem over here, which is kind of our lizard brain. It's our primitive
Look like ears right here.
brain that controls things like level of arousal, breathing, respirations, heart rate.
This controls arousal? Right at the stem there? Arousal, breathing, respiration, heart rate. You don't want to put that all in the same place. Jesus Christ. No wonder Viagra does what it does. Viagra was supposed to I think it was for something to do with the heart, I think. But then it ended up making people all erect. So that makes sense. It's all in the stem, right?
Blood pressure. We have some deep motor functions here in the brain as well. Or another part of the brain that we have is our cerebellum, kind of on the bottom, which is also involved in motor control and motor planning.
In doing one task, you could be using multiple parts of your brain, but you're not using everything at the same time. Video games rot your brain.
So this is a myth. Video
Yeah,
games.
it's obviously a myth. It never made sense. Engaging in entertainment rots your brain. That would mean TV would rot your brain way faster than video games, and no one says anything about TV.
In and of themselves don't actually rot your brain. It's something that I definitely...
Actually, in my writing class, I learned when we were doing a class on old school comics, they talked about how there was a psychologist that popularized the theory that comic books cause children to engage in violent acts. And as you see that going forward in time, it kind of said the same thing about television and like any kind of entertainment medium that that might engage in some sort of like some sort of portrayal of violence. I think they even said the same thing about cartoons and all that stuff. Throughout human history, there's always a psychologist coming along that's saying some form of entertainment is either rotting your brains, causing children to become violent or unruly or whatever, and they're just constantly just doing that over and over again. And then eventually, when video games became when it became a big industry and people realized how much money it was actually making, how much attention it got from all over the world, then it's rotting your brain and it's causing kids to become violent. And it's something that's repeated over and over, but because we're not as old as human history, we don't remember that this thing has happened before. So it's just like, it's the same thing over and over again.
I've only heard a lot when I was younger from my grandma, my mom.
A lot of our literature has shown that video games, especially the ones that focus on team building, on solving riddles, solving puzzles, building strategy, are actually pretty good for you. They actually do build up those centers of your brain, especially when you're a child.
You know, games can be used for other purposes. For example, our colleagues in surgery, when they do scopes, they practice those skills with things like video game simulators.
Looking at the trials, no one has actually defined what too much video games is. Every literature study that I've looked at quotes between 12 hours to 90 hours a week is okay. I feel like
no, it's because it's entertainment, right? So too much would be whatever is disrupting your natural function, right? If you're playing too much, you're playing video games all the time, and you're not taking care of your hygiene, you're not taking care of work, your bills, you're not taking care of all these things that make you function naturally, then it's too much.
90 hours might be a little excessive, but I think in reality, the bigger signs of someone withdrawing from social activities and wanting to just stay at home and play video games, and they'd prefer to do that than do other things, that's more of a red flag.
No, it's not. See, that's backwards. When people withdraw from social events because of what happened socially, maybe they were shamed or they don't have any friends or whatever, when they withdraw from social events, that's when they turn to video games and other forms of entertainment and all those things. They're diagnosing it backwards. You're noticing them doing those things, so you think they're withdrawing from other things in order to do that. No, they withdraw from social events because of whatever they're feeling, and they use that to cope. It's people are just, I don't know, man, because you only see what you see, right? So it's hard to like conceptualize that, oh, just because I don't do that thing, I just can't understand what's going on with it. But like I played video games a lot as a kid. And the reason I played video games a lot as a kid is because I loved it. I enjoyed playing it. And I never withdraw from social events. I just never really enjoyed social events. But when I had a lot of friends. Every time I hung out, I hung out with people all the time. And some of my friends, we played video games too. But if I spend more time socializing with my friends, guess what I would be doing? I would be drinking because they had parties and they would drink. I would be freaking going out, freaking tossing shit at cars. Like just all kinds of stuff that are also bad for you socially. You develop a lot of social habits, smoking, all that stuff. Instead of just the video games. It's just like whatever you're feeling, it's not going to go away. You're going to engage in negative activities regardless, but they see the video games and they're like, okay, if they take the video games away, they think, okay, now they solved that problem. But no, it's backwards. It's the child was feeling a certain type of way. That's why they withdraw, not because of the video games.
I'll say everything in moderation. Like if it's affecting your social life, if you're just stuck in front of the TV all day, that's not good psychologically.
Yeah. You see, and then people will say that, and then the parents are going to do when they see that, take the video games away, and they think they solved the problem. You didn't. The problem was never the video games.
Memory gets worse as you age.
So this is false. In fact, there's some type.
Really? Huh. Well, I guess there's Alzheimer's that kind of gives you that false sense. And also, the longer you live, the more memory you have, the more things you have to remember. So a lot of things will get lost. Like unimportant information is just shunted to the side.
Types of memory that improve as you get older. For example, things like semantic memory, your vocabulary, reading, procedural memory. For example, people that are very good at musical instruments, like can play the piano, often will retain those skills. Some people will notice some changing memory. That's often things like episodic memory, which is kind of our memory of recent events.
Episodic memory is basically like the who, what, where, and when. So where did I put my keys? Where did I park my car? Those kind of things do tend to decline. And I think a lot of it is because we just aren't as focused on things. It's not necessarily something that's pathological or suggests dementia.
Not everyone will get dementia, but that risk does increase as you get older. Right now, we don't have any medications or treatments that can prevent someone from getting Alzheimer's disease. There are some environmental risk factors that if you address can prevent you from getting dementia or at least prevent your memory from getting worse. So some of those things include
They don't have any treatment for dementia. They don't have... I mean, they have some treatment for cancer. Maybe we need to, fund dementia treatments a little bit more. People are living longer now. I'm not trying to... it's like, that's the worst thing imaginable, right? You're already old, your body's already failing, and now your mind is gone. What do you have left? Jesus, there's no point in living at that point.
As general health, eating healthy foods, taking care of your heart, moderate exercise, making sure that you stay healthy cardiovascularly, which is also going to help your brain.
Left-brained people are logical and right-brained people are creative.
I think this myth came from the 1800s when, as neurologists are trying to figure out different functions of the brain, they discovered that the left side of our brain in most people is dominant for language, verbal memory, whereas the right brain was much more of our visual spatial functions. But there's no structural brain difference in people who are more logical versus more creative. Rather, it's more their environment, the way that they were raised. In neurology, when we talk about brain hemispheric dominance, we typically are talking about language and verbal memory dominance. Where does that live? And for most people, that's on the left side of the brain.
So if you're right-handed about 90% of the time, you're going to be left hemisphere dominant, which means a lot of your memory and speech production and understanding, comprehension, that kind of stuff's going to sit on the left side of your brain. Whereas if you're left-handed, it can kind of go both ways. So I think the reality is we say that someone is left brain dominant or right brain dominant, and it doesn't really...
Why are the left-handed people all bisexual? I mean, by brain, whatever. Why do they go in both ways?
It mean that one person is more creative and the other one is more logical.
These are just talents and sort of skills that people develop, whether inherently or through their personalities, but it really has nothing to do with the side of their brain that they use more.
You can't prevent a stroke. No,
that's not true.
That's very not true, actually.
You can definitely prevent a stroke. How to do that is by really addressing all of the factors that could result in a stroke. We know very clearly that things like high blood pressure, smoking, high cholesterol, diabetes, unfortunately increase.
Jesus Christ. Okay, high blood pressure. Well, I mean, you're gonna have to prevent that first before you deal with the stroke issue. Smoking, high cholesterol, diabetes. Like the smoking is pretty much the only thing that's really in your control. This stuff right here, like this is stuff that comes up without you even noticing it.
Your risk for a stroke, which is basically when there's not enough blood flow going to your brain because of a blood clot or bleeding in the brain. There's no quick and easy fix. Again, it's about maintaining your cardiovascular and brain health over time so that you never get into a situation where a stroke will occur. If you do ever have symptoms of a stroke, and we often tell people this fast mnemonic, so facial droop, arm weakness, slurred speech or language problems, and then T is time. Call 911 and get to the hospital right away. Emergency medicine physicians can give you clot busting medications to break up the clot that's causing the stroke. So there's things that we can do to address it and prevent it from getting worse.
And I think there's a misconception that stroke is an old person's disease. We know this isn't true. Anyone of any age can have a stroke. The reason why you're going to have it is going to be different if you're older versus when you're younger. But a big cause of stroke in young people is brain bleeds. If you have a family history of aneurysm, you should definitely get screened. I think that's actually recommended.
Eating fish makes you smarter.
So I actually don't know where this one came from,
Yeah,
but
that's
maybe
weird...
it's like an immigrant household thing, but I heard this.
Yeah, I've never heard that. I've never heard that at all. Especially, I mean, I grew up on an island. We ate fish all the time. People weren't smarter.
Yeah. I mean, in Asian households, for sure. This is tricky because fish doesn't necessarily make you smarter, but it is good for you. And some fish, more than others, have omega-3s, which we know are good for heart health, good for brain health, and just good for your overall body health. So I think maybe that's why this one came into place, but I don't think it makes you smarter. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it was my parents' way of getting us to eat more fish. You do have to be careful at eating too much fish. We know that certain types of fish have more mercury than others, like tuna. You don't want to overdo it.
I should add that fish is part of a Mediterranean diet, which we advocate for all of our patients. Mediterranean diets are diets that are rich in good fats, like fish, for example, olive oils, vegetables, healthy grains. And that
is the extra virgin olive oil or just like the regular slutty kind?
Going to be helpful for stroke prevention. It's going to be good for cholesterol, for hypertension, for diabetes, all kinds of stuff. So fish as part of a healthy diet is good for you, but it will not make you smarter. You can always trust your senses.
Nope.
I would say that's a myth. Our senses can play tricks on us and cause things like illusions or even sometimes hallucinations. For example, people with schizophrenia might hear voices of people talking that aren't actually there. Our senses are not 100% objective. They're dependent on how well our brains and, eyes, ears are functioning at that time.
Everyone is different. My pain tolerance might be lower than Brad's or vice versa. I don't think we have a really good neurological way of explaining why that might be. That's still something that we don't fully understand. Also, your senses can be a little influenced by emotions and memories, I think. If you see something that reminds you of someone, the way you're going to react to it might be a little different.
I don't know if what I'm seeing is the same thing that everyone else is seeing. Like, how can we ever know
It's like when they had that blue dress and the black dress and people were seeing different things.
Okay.
Different sexes have different brains.
No, I thought there was just like certain chemicals that are different and it just affects the brain differently. The emotions, the way things express itself. But I'm pretty sure we have the same brain. Just like our body structure is pretty much the same, but just certain tweaks, like the same reason men have nipples even though we don't need them.
So no, that's not true. And I'm going to rip it again because that was satisfying. I should start with saying that we're all born with the same brain, regardless of what your gender identity is, regardless of what your sexual orientation is. There's really no structural differences. So if a neurosurgeon was looking at two different brains, they wouldn't know who was assigned male at birth and who was assigned female at birth.
It's not true. There are some differences where they can tell. For instance, size. Size would be an indicator.
Birth. There have been studies out there that have shown that those have been assigned female at birth might have more robust emotional pathways.
What is this assigned shit? Why is she talking like that? Assigned at birth, assigned. This is creepy. I'm gonna have to reject her doctorate or whatever the hell qualification she has.
Versus those who have been assigned male at birth are more executive thinkers.
Why is she using this modern weirdo speech? Nothing was assigned, lady.
We now know that that's not true. As you get older, if you've been exposed to different things, how you relate to the outside world, that's what develops the structures of your brain and the connectivity. It has really nothing to do with what gender you were assigned.
What the fuck are you talking about? What are you actually talking about? There are some differences between the male and female brain. It might not, the structure might be the same, but like the effects are different. Different chemicals affect your brains differently. What are you actually freaking talking? Your environment somehow make you male and female? All right.
At birth. It's more nurture. It's not necessarily nature and how you're made.
Nah, this is there's some corporate speech right here. She's getting funded by BlackRock or something. This is weird, man.
Have a seizure, you have epilepsy.
No. I'm going to rip this a few times because I want to make my point. What a seizure is hypersynchronization of brain cells. So what is that? Your brain talks to itself using electricity. If something goes wrong with the electricity in your brain, you have a seizure. Basically, when all of your neurons freak out and fire at once, your body hypersynchronizes and we have a seizure. Seizures can be due to a lot of things, not necessarily epilepsy, which is a lifelong neurological condition. You have to have multiple unprovoked seizures, and that's the difference between a seizure and epilepsy. Also, if you have epilepsy, you have to take daily medication to keep your brain from having seizures. So if you have had your first seizure of lifetime, or if you're someone with seizures, there are a few things that you should do. One, definitely get checked out by a neurologist. There are tests that we can order that can be helpful.
Why is this part of her mouth not able to move? Either she's having an allergic reaction or she had some work done and now it's just like make her look ridiculous.
For you, one of them is an EEG. We put stickers on your head, look at your brain waves and see where the abnormalities are. And the second one is the imaging that we have. MRIs and PET MRIs are both used. And if a diagnosis of epilepsy is made, the most important thing for you to do is take your medications. And lastly, keep communicating with your doctor because you're not going to get to that period of seizure freedom
unless you're assigned seizure at birth.
Unless you communicate with your doctor. You only get one brain. You're born with all the brain cells that you are going to have, and it's up to you to take care of them.
There's a grain of truth in a lot of these myths, but...
Okay, I get it. Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff most of the stuff they were saying is very informative, but when she got into that whole assigned at birth and your brains are the same regardless of your like that shit right there, that was just off, man. It was just a whole different sort of. She got energy all of a sudden. She came alive. That was weird. Anyways, until next time.